All right, so today we have Jason Underhill from Austin Ridge. Jason is the children and family pastor, and he is responsible for pretty much everything birth through graduation. So a lot of stuff going on that Jason uh, oversees at Austin Ridge. Jason, so excited to have you on here today, man. Could you tell me a bit about your background and what called you into ministry and how you found your role at Austin Ridge?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here and to share some information. So, my background actually is in education. I was a former school
Mm.
teacher. When I went out of college, I went into to teach and in the inner city schools. And so, one of the things I found out most was kids were separated from parents, had a lot of issues with that. And so what I found out was I was actually doing probably more work trying to minister to the parent than I was the kid themselves in some ways.
Mm.
But the parents were disconnected because of just the region that I was in, and the schools that are in. The parents were disconnected with the kids, and so kids would walk to school. I had some of them that had parole officers by the time they were in fifth grade, just because of
Oh.
not having dads in the picture. So for me, I was being a role model as being, what does it look like to be a dad? To a lot of these
Mm.
kids that didn't have dads, and I had a lot of single parents. I had grandparents raising kids, and so in that process, God just stirred in me a heart of, is there more I could do? I felt like I was limited in what I could do in the local school. So I met with my lead pastor at the time, that where my wife and I had joined churches, and just said, hey, what does it look like to be in ministry? What does that look like? And he started to mentor me and just take me kind of under his wing and give me some advice on what it looked like to do ministry. And so
Mm.
he saw that, some other people saw that in me. And so I began to pray about that, felt called to that. And so I left teaching and went to seminary, went and got involved in a church as an intern and learned the book study stuff with how you do the practical stuff, all working with kids and families. And so God just really used those opportunities to propel me into ministry. I was still doing ministry before, but didn't realize, I could do it as a full time profession. And that's what I love. I still love that even today.
So, I mean, yeah, that is a lot to take in there, Jason. So, I had two things on that note. One, a lot of folks from education backgrounds end up finding themselves pulled into ministry. What were some ways that was really helpful for you? And then what were some big differences between like K-12 education and kids ministry education?
For me, it was very similar. I didn't have a huge difference for me. I think the biggest difference was you're teaching Christian principles versus just schooling, educational
Mm.
context. And so for me, it was actually the challenge in the local school was trying to teach, couldn't teach the Christian principles unless a kid brought it up in school, because I didn't have the right to do it
Mm.
unless a kid actually said something about it. So they knew my background, but it was up to the child to begin to have those spiritual conversations versus me starting that. That would be a
Mm.
challenge. But in terms of trying to connect families and kids, I see a lot of similarities. I see how the church and the schools can have a partnership. And so that's one of the things I have a heart and passion for even today, is because I think there's a disconnect. I think schools don't
Mm.
realize how much the church can actually help them, and vice versa, how the school can also help, and be two entities working together to establish and help uh,
Mm.
build the home back up and help build kids up in relationships they've not had before or existed.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes into my second question. So it's
Okay.
great to hear you're a role model for a lot of the kids from, less fortunate backgrounds in your time in K-12. And so, with that said, what advice would you offer to people that feel called to be a role model, be supportive for those in disadvantaged communities? And what advice would you have for parents or even like maybe older youth in those situations that are looking for someone for support?
Yeah, I think for students, they're hungry for mentors. They're hungry for people that are available. And I think if you have
Mm.
the time to invest, or you have the ability to be able to spend one on one, or to be a partner or mentor with someone else, I would say do it, because you'll be amazed how much you can change that child's life, but also that child's going to speak and change you more so than you would maybe even think. I've got a story, if you don't mind sharing that you
Yeah.
say that. One of the kids that I was kind of teaching or mentoring, he was actually being raised by his grandparents. It was a fourth grade class, kind of to give you an example. Tough life. His parents were actually in prison and things like that. But at the same time, he was being raised by his grandparents. I had no idea the influence that I had with this kid over the years. And probably it was my first year of teaching. So this kid reached out to me, I think it was about 3 years ago. So it's been probably 18 to 20 years since we had actually talked. He got on Facebook and just messaged me and he said, "Hey, I just want you to know you made a huge impact on my life. You probably have no idea what actually happened to me once I left." Because I remember he left the school not knowing what was going to happen. It was a weird situation because of his parents. But the key thing, kind of to your point, is you never know how God's going to use you when you invest yourself in the life of a child or a student that will impact them forever. And so I was just with him for a year of teaching for about 8 months, just loving on him, teaching. I had no idea the impact. And then he writes me this huge Facebook post and said, "I've become a Christian. I'm doing all this stuff. And it was all because of what you taught me in that 1 year that I had you." So you just never know what God's going to do in the short amount of time that you have. So take advantage of it when you can.
Absolutely. And that is a beautiful story. So thank you so much for sharing that, Jason. It really does show how God is working, even if it can be hard to see sometimes, or if you might say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I only, talked to this person for a little bit of time and it's been 18 years, but the impacts are very far ranging." So that's definitely going to encourage a lot of folks reading and listening, Jason. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then, with that said, kind of on the same thread, but shifting gears a little, being responsible for Kidsmen at Austin Ridge, you oversee in-person lessons and programming, online lessons and programming, and reaching a lot of kids and students. What are some of your basically like tips for creating and using and engaging ministry both in person and online?
Yeah. So what we try to do, and we try to, I guess it's a philosophy, but we try to engage our whole team to be a part of the process. But we want the engagement to be as similar as possible, so that when families do come in person, they have the same experience as they hopefully even have at home. And so what we try to do is we try to bridge that gap to what we're offering online. It's still the same Bible stories. There's maybe different games that you do, because we have sometimes group games, but there's a game option that kids can play. There's still Bible study. Parents lead it at home, but in person, it's the small groups. So the engagement, those types of things are always the same. It may look a little differently, but we want the experience to be the same. And so we want those that are maybe at home to be able to connect with us in a way that when they do come in person, or we hopefully can bridge that gap to where they can be in person, they will. And so, for example, we make sure that we do our own intro and outro videos and things like that, and rotate some of our staff so that all of us are involved, so that everybody within the church that's online gets to see us and know us before they enter the building. And so one of the great things that's happened over the last year because of that is we have parents now that will actually introduce us, like they know us as the adult, or parents say, "Hey, there's Mr. Jason. He's the one you've been watching online, and here he is in person. Why don't you, say hi." And so it helps the kid to already make a connection with us. So one of the great things that we've seen is just that interaction. Even though we're not physically in their home, we know that just because our face is there to introduce, "Hey, here's who we are," it already has built a relationship with that child and with that family, despite us not even meeting in person. And that's been kind of a neat thing for our team to associate with, whether that's our preschool ministry that has teams that actually lead worship as well, or small groups, to all the way up through high school, different things that we do on a regular basis.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that notion of bridging the gap there. So it really does make it easy for the kids when they come in person, especially if they haven't been in person, to get
Hmm.
comfortable and plugged into your ministry. So that is very awesome to hear, Jason, and love to hear how you're prioritizing that. And that's one of the things where it's not like a number, so it's not
Hmm.
really easy to track. And you might think,
Yes.
hey, if it's not a number, a goal, it's not attendance, it's not giving, it's not any of these other important metrics, but it is something very important happening. And great to see you honing in on that. And a little on that thread, what are some other maybe non-number metrics, but other important things that you look for that really show you that your ministry is moving in Austin Ridge?
Yeah, so I think another thing that we have looked at or engaging is we didn't realize we don't really measure, we hadn't measured necessarily our outreach for online
Mhm.
content. And so we started kind of looking at, but we started realizing that there are more people watching online, probably that we had no idea, and we still didn't even know because we can't really measure it. And we try to do our best through Facebook. We even with Playlister itself, you can get some information, but there are people that may not have tapped in to our
Mhm.
links or whatever and even know where they are to really capture the impact that we're making in the home. I think that's one of the things that our team has been able to see a little bit is like we may be impacting families that we don't even know exist out there with the gospel. And there's
Mhm.
no way to quantitatively even see who those families are individually, if that makes sense. We know who our people are in the church, local church here, because they'll be the ones telling us, but there's so many people outside of it that maybe just checking it out. Some friend has invited them, said, hey, you need to check out what they're doing online from all over, not just Austin, but even in other states. We've had friends that say, hey, we've got cousins or whatever we've invited to come, but we can't quantitatively measure what that impact
Mhm.
is. But it's really cool to know that it's happening.
Oh yeah, more than agree with that, Jason. And just for some perspective, looking at the analytics on Playlister at home, we see viewership in hundreds of countries, like over 100
Hmm.
countries. And so just like beyond, just your city or the recent nearby states, but all over the world. And so even if some of those people may never set foot in your church in person, you're still reaching them, and that is, what the aim of the game here is. So that is
Hmm.
outstanding to hear, and something always, really motivating to us in ministry is, hey, your impact is farther reaching than you could possibly imagine sometimes. So with all that said, what are some important principles and values you and your team at Austin Ridge used to operate by?
Yeah, so we actually use three words. We use this for our whole church, but we also kind of dumb them down. I say dumb down in that we fit it to fit each of our different ministry areas based on what kids, students, adults can comprehend. But we use three words:
Mhm.
know, grow, and serve. And within those
Okay.
three words, it's know Jesus, grow in Jesus, and serve in Jesus. And so we want everyone that comes through our church to have that value and understanding to know that as they begin to know who Jesus is, that's beginning to have a
Mm.
relationship. We want everyone to come and have an understanding of knowing who Jesus is as their Lord and Savior. That's the first step. If you don't know who Jesus is, it's hard to help them through the next two steps. But once they accept
Mm.
Christ into their life, so that's know, then we go into grow. And so we want to connect every student, every child into a small group. So that's where they grow. Every adult goes through a life group or a connect group. We do, women's and men's Bible studies or D groups, but we want to help them
Mm.
take that next step of growth so that they can grow closer in their relationship with Christ. So it's a grow. It's growing them spiritually to become more like Christ. Now, so you have they now know who Jesus is. Now we're going to grow them to become mature Christians, disciple them, and then the next step is we want them to all serve. We want to teach and train, no matter what stage of life they're in, that they can serve. And we begin really teaching that concept specifically with our fourth and fifth graders, where we have what we call junior leaders. We already go ahead and call them leaders. We feel like that's an
Mm.
important name. They're kids, but we're wanting to go ahead and teach them to know that as Jesus followers, they're also leaders of Christ and they can begin to serve. And so we have opportunities for them to serve beginning in fourth and fifth grade, to start serving, get connected, We do a spiritual gifts inventory test for those kids to begin to understand what gifts they are. But we do that across all the age spectrums as well. But that's where it kind of starts. We want to try to build that all the way through the entire church. And so that's some of the things that we've done. And then we kind of bring it down into three key categories or three key words. We have our preschool years we consider love. We want all of them to understand that God loves them. And so in that age range of infants to preschool, they need to understand that God loves them. Just like at home, they've got to understand that parents love them. If they don't know what love is, how are they going to have a good perspective of a God that loves them? And so hopefully they understand what love is. And then when they get to elementary years, it's about grace. They understand that they've messed up. They understand sin, but there's grace involved. There's someone there, Jesus, who has grace and shows mercy and will forgive them. And then when they get to middle school and high school, we use the word hope because there's hope for the future of what God has for you. And so there's a plan for them to take those next steps of what their purpose and fulfilling that and things like that. So we want students to even join in the work that God's doing and bring hope to the world. So those are kind of all encompassing, but both and philosophy we're trying to teach our families here at Austin Ridge.
Well, absolutely. You love that, especially the love, grace, and hope. Just being on the same page with everyone, with the parents of the family and everything is, hey, this is, what our ministry means at this juncture in your child's life. That is super important to set those kind of, what the goal is. And then as far as the know, grow, and serve, really like that. So definitely going to spread that word around because, it is a beautiful way to kind of describe the journey in ministry that you can see someone on, coming from just arriving at your church, maybe even not accepting Jesus as their savior yet, to, being an evangel and spreading the word. So that is absolutely outstanding to see. And I love, just simple things like, hey, know, grow, serve, easy to remember, easy to visualize. And so, yeah, thank you so much for sharing those values, Jason, because they are obviously super, super important. And values are kind of what sets the foundation for the work we do in ministry to accomplish goals. So what are some of your short and long-term ministry goals?
Yeah, so currently, I guess our short-term goals right now, we're trying to build a team of volunteers that will really connect and build relationships with our kids, because we know if the team of volunteers don't do that, we can't minister to the masses. But we're looking for consistency. So I've been here, I'm on my third year here. And one of the things that I noticed is there was kind of a gap between serving consistently. And so we're trying to change that culture. So that's a short-term goal, but it has a long-term effect because it's going to sustain the ministry for a long period of time. It's also going to sustain those kids to be more consistent, those families potentially be more consistent with the word and to be coming each and every week. I told our leaders, we just had a leader launch meeting this past Sunday as we kicked off the new year, and just to be reminded of them to say, without consistency, we're going to miss out on opportunities to teach these kids the most important message, the grace, the gospel. But what we're done in the past is we haven't acknowledged that in the way that we've staffed our volunteers, from what I've seen, not in a bad way, but just saying, you wouldn't want to send your kid, for example, to school and they have a different teacher every day or every other week when they go to school. What parent's going to send their kid to that school? They're not. It's just not going to happen. But that's what the church, unfortunately, has done in a lot of ways, is we think, hey, I'm going to just serve every other week or every other month. And there's no consistency for that kid to build a relationship with another trusted adult that can bridge that gap with what potentially that parent is trying to teach that child at home, so that when the church and home come together, they have a common theme and common thing. And so we're trying to take those steps from kind of a short-term goal, but it's going to be a long-term goal to see the fruit of that over a period of time for those families and kids.
Absolutely. And, you love that idea of consistency. Consistency is key to anything. And that is something where it's really important to look at it from the the kid's perspective, because
Hmm. Yeah.
just we're so juxtapositioned in our own thoughts. It's like, okay, I'm gonna serve every other week, maybe once a month. You get
Right.
like a schedule that works for you, and you think that's fine because of course you think it's fine because you
Yeah.
picked it out. You're not
Right.
looking at the kid's point of view of like, hey,
Yeah.
this person, they're only here sporadically, a new person each time, and you're not building as much of a relationship as could be built if you're there every weekend consistently. And
Hmm.
I love the idea you mentioned of measuring the short-term goals over the long term, because it's easy to say something's not working if you only are doing it for a really small period of time and you just deem it a
Hmm.
failure or whatnot. But you really do have to see those long ranging things. And that goes back to our discussion about the youth you mentored a while ago, and they reached
Hmm.
out to you like 20 years later. So it's really a long term. Like this is
Yeah.
not going to be decided, in a short time frame. So yeah, that is very insightful, Jason.
Yeah. Thank you. And a lot of times the stuff that our volunteers do now, they may never see the fruit of what they actually have put in. But they know that
Mm,
they're a part of the process, and that's what we have to be reminded of. We have to remind our teams all the time and say, hey, you know what, this is, you may never see the fruit, but you're a part of the process, that God's called you to be a part of this. And then as the leaders are actually being more consistent, one of the things that we notice and we'll point out, I'm trying to help them see that, it says if you see your group growing, that's probably because you're being a consistent leader. You're here every week. The groups that are not, the
mm,
small groups or groups that are not growing, it's because there's not consistency. Those kids aren't building that relationship with that leader to build consistency over a period of time. So it's kind of neat because you can actually measure that in a weird way, and it helps to
mhm.
re-emphasize how important that consistency is with the group as well. And I'll even just challenge them, say periodically, I'll just go and ask and say, hey, do you know who your small group leader is? And if I get a kid that says they don't know who their small group leader is, then I know we're missing the mark of being
Mm.
consistent with that age group. And it's like, okay, that's where we've got to step in and find, okay, how can we help get consistent leaders for this particular class or age group?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, love the idea of one just asking the kid. It's a really simple test. It's like, hey, here's your small
Yeah.
group leader. But not only does seeing the groups grow give you a way to measure success, but it's great, and brings a lot of joy to your heart to see those groups grow. So love that idea there, Jason. And yeah, learned a lot of awesome stuff. It's going to help our partners tremendously. So thank you so much for sharing so much today,
Yeah.
Jason. What other advice would you offer for ministry leaders while we're on here today?
I guess the phrase, and we've probably heard this phrase before, but it's, uh, you're not on a sprint, it's really a marathon. And I
Hmm.
say that because really what we do today, it lasts a long time, but it takes time to build your ministries. I think a lot of people think that it should happen in 2 or 3 years. You should start growing and seeing all this, but we have to be mindful that our timing is not God's timing, and
Hmm.
his timing and fruition to what growth may be. It takes time to build. You have to sow seeds, you have to do the work. And sometimes you don't see the fruit or see the growth until 10, 15 years down the road. And I think we as leaders, in the culture we are in, we want to see it now. And that's not the way God works. I mean, it takes years for people to really hone in on what the vision, what it is that God has for them. And so we have to look at it
Hmm.
from a step by step and not look at it from a sprint, but look at from it as a marathon. It's going to take a long time to make it happen.
Absolutely, and that is definitely something to keep in mind because it can be easy, with how much stuff is on your plate as a ministry leader, to overextend yourself. But
Hmm.
it's not a sprint; it's a marathon. You can't run a marathon sprinting the whole,
No.
26 miles.
Right.
So it's good to pause, take a breather, just keep consistently working on that. So it's something everyone can hold up to, a reminder in their life. So thank you again so much for sharing,
Yeah.
Jason, and enjoyed chatting today.
Yeah. Thanks. I enjoyed it as well. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.